Well, good afternoon. That was Mob Busters, composer David Holsinger's theme for an imaginary old-time radio show. In his program notes, he says, each summer, as the Holsinger family drives from the Dallas-Fort Worth area to the family farm near Kansas City, one of the highlights of the trip is listening to recordings of oldie radio shows from the 40s and 50s, borrowed from the local library. Who does that anymore, right? We get many laughs from Our Miss Brooks and Baby Snooks, but our favorites are the radio mysteries like Boston Blackie P.I., Lux Mystery Theater, and Police Water. So, there it was, harkening back to the days when before television, when you had to imagine the action, your very own radio show theme. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Camden Community Concert Band's March Concert. We're so glad that you took the time to come out and share the next hour with us. The band is under the direction of Mr. Glenn Price. We are an all-volunteer organization comprised of musicians from all walks of life who live and work right here in Kershaw County and the surrounding communities. Our musicians form a real cross-section of the population. Some are students, some are retired. We have teachers, business owners, engineers, computer technicians, and nurses, just to name a few. Some of our members are former band directors, some played in college, and quite a few are simply former high school players that picked up their instruments after long years of disuse, cleaned them up, oiled the valves, and started trying to remember their scales and warm-up exercises. The one thing we all share is our love of music and our desire to serve the community. If that interests you, then we encourage you, please, join us. For our next selection, composer David Gillingham drew inspiration from hymns and poetry to capture the serenity, beauty, and hope of dawn in At Morning's First Light. Close your eyes and see with your ears the birds as they leave their nest, the opening flowers, the rising sun and the dew evaporating from the leaves and grass. Feel the sun on your skin as the new day begins, full of the joy of living and the peace of a new day. At Morning's First Light by David Gillingham. Voyage of the Dawn Treader is the third installment of the beloved series of books, The Chronicles of Narnia, written by C.S. Lewis in the 1950s, and further popularized by the film series, which had its first release in 2005, with the fourth film in the series set to be released this year. The Dawn Treader is the ship that the protagonists sail on an epic journey of discovery. At the end of the story, the main characters leave the ship and were never told of her fate. Apparently that did not sit well with Richard Meyer, since he has imagined the return of the Dawn Treader and composed our next selection so we can all join in her dramatic return to Narnia. Return of the Dawn Treader by Richard Meyer. The name George Kinney is a pseudonym for Kenneth G. Whitcomb, a Michigan-born composer, conductor, educator, and saxophonist. One of his notable compositions is Coat of Arms from 1957. It is written in traditional march form, but he has succeeded in making every part interesting to play, and we hope interesting for you to hear. Please welcome to the podium Robert Wirtz, our associate conductor, for Coat of Arms by George Kinney. Is that better? In the fall of 2000, Warner Brothers was looking for a composer for their newest film, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Initially, the director, Chris Columbus, yes, Chris Columbus, wanted to get an idea of which composer was best suited to compose the film's score by giving different composers the task of creating a theme for a promotional short for the film. Williams, without having seen any footage from the film, composed the first draft of Hedwig's theme for the short, which he presented to Columbus on piano. In a 2021 interview, Chris recounts the experience. When I heard the Potter theme, John Williams played it for me on the piano. He just plucked out the theme, and I thought, this is the guy. It's one of those great geek moments for a guy who loves movies. I was like, oh my God, I can't imagine what the rest of the score is going to be like. And then the rest of the score was equally astounding. Hedwig's theme by John Williams, arranged by Victor Lopez. In 1932, just 1 month before the death of John Philip Sousa, the wife of a jazz drummer in New York City gave birth to a son. As he grew up, he studied piano and composition at the University of California at Los Angeles and the Juilliard School in New York City. By the time he was in his late 20s, he was an active jazz and studio pianist and began composing music for television and films. In 1974, he met an ambitious young director named Steven Spielberg, and the two forged a friendship that would prove to be one of the most successful partnerships in the history of filmmaking. That year, the pair worked together on a film called Sugarland Express, starring Goldie Hawn, and a year later teamed up again for Jaws. It wasn't long before this talented young man's music garnered international attention unlike any American composer since Sousa. In case you haven't guessed, that composer was John Williams. In a career that spans six decades, Williams has composed many of the most famous film scores in Hollywood history, including the three that are found in this medley. We hope you enjoy the themes from Star Wars, Jurassic Park, and E.T. the Extraterrestrial in Movie Adventures, arranged for band by Michael Sweeney. The actor James Dean was killed in a car accident in 1955. He was just 24 years old. His death sparked an unparalleled outpouring of sorrow. For 3 years after his death, Warner Brothers received more letters to him than to any living actor. For years following his death, the letters continued. Artist Kenneth Kendall sculpted a bronze bust of Dean that is located close to Griffith Park Observatory in Los Angeles, California. On his shoulder is an inscription in Greek. Translated into English, it says, "As summer was just beginning." This statement is from the painter John Lafarge, who used this Greek phrase written about the passing away of a youth. Composer Larry Dean chose this phrase as the title for this next piece that is loosely based on a British Isles folk song titled "The Winter It Is Past and the Summer's Here at Last." Mr. Dean chose this piece to honor James Dean's Quaker heritage, which can be traced back to England, Ireland, and Scotland. As summer was just beginning, a song for James Dean by Larry Dean. William Paris Chambers spent most of his early years in Newville, Pennsylvania. He was a self-taught cornet player and became a proficient performer in a relatively short amount of time. At the age of 18, he became leader of the local band in Newville. Although his conducting ability was well known, it was his magnificent solo cornet work which made him famous. As a stunt, he once played a cornet solo on the summit of Pikes Peak, an elevation of 14,500 feet, which means there's absolutely no air up there to blow a cornet. One of his favorite concert tricks was to hold the cornet inverted during difficult solos, pushing the valves up instead of down and with the backs of his fingers, and maintaining the correct tempo. When he wasn't busy conducting and showing off on the cornet, he managed to write nearly 90 marches. The Heritage Encyclopedia of Band Music says that the majority of his marches are highly distinctive and of a structure sufficiently complex to tax the resources of even the finest musician. This arrangement by our very own Emmett Anglin retains the structure, but does give us at least an opportunity to catch our breath. On Dress Parade by W. Paris Chambers, arranged by Mr. Emmett Anglin. Giacomo Puccini was one of the greatest Italian composers of opera. La Bohème, Tosca, and Madame Butterfly are familiar titles even to those who are not fans of the genre. When he died in 1924, he was working on an opera named Turandot. The first two acts were complete, including the orchestrations, but part of the third scene was not fully orchestrated and he was still struggling with the ending. Before his death, he had pleaded with famed director and friend Arturo Toscanini, "Don't let my Turandot die." Puccini's family chose Franco Alfano to complete the opera from Puccini's notes and sketches. Turandot premiered at the La Scala Opera House in Milan in 1926. The opera is set in China and follows the Prince Calaf, who falls in love with the cold-hearted Princess Turandot. In order to win her hand in marriage, a suitor must solve 3 riddles, with a wrong answer resulting in his execution. Calaf passes the test, but Turandot refuses to marry him. He offers her a way out. If she is able to guess his name before dawn the next day, he will accept death. As Act 3 begins, the city is in turmoil. Princess Turandot has proclaimed that no one shall sleep until her subjects have discovered the name of her suitor, and if the name is not revealed to her, then all will die. In the midst of this chaos, Calaf steps out and confidently sings Nessun dorma, none shall sleep. Some of the lyrics include, "None shall sleep, not even you, O princess, in your cold bedroom, watching the stars that tremble with love and with hope. But my secret is hidden within me. No one will know my name. No, no, I will say it on your mouth when the daylight shines, and my kiss will dissolve the silence that makes you mine." Just before the climactic end of the aria, a chorus of women is heard singing in the distance, "No one will know his name, and alas, we will have to die." Calaf, certain of victory, sings, "Vanish, O night, fade, you stars. At dawn, I will win, I will win, I will win." Turandot by Giacomo Puccini, arranged for band by J. Boco. David Black is an award-winning percussionist and composer from Los Angeles. His compositions include works for concert band, jazz ensemble, orchestra, choral music, and a number of method books and courses for percussion. While searching for background information on his composition, Emerald Isle, I reached out to him and he was kind enough to respond. I've always loved Irish folk songs, so when I traveled to Ireland many years ago, I was inspired to write this piece when I returned. The Emerald Isle is an original two-movement work in the Irish folk song style. It begins with a lovely melody that features the woodwinds with horn chords in the background. The second movement is a jaunty jig in 6/8 time that features a driving percussion section and a lively melody. He also expressed his gratitude that we're including his piece on the concert program and hopes that you would enjoy it. Please welcome Robert Wertz back to the podium for Emerald Isle by Dave Black. As leader of the U.S. Marine Corps Band, the March King, John Philip Sousa, came under the command of Major George Porter Houston. In Sousa's eyes, Houston was a stern but fair officer. And in 1885, Sousa wrote Sound Off and dedicated the march to him. As in the case of Guide Right, Right Forward, and Right Left, the title was derived from a marching command. You don't have to salute or march, but you may want to sit at attention as the band presents Sound Off by John Philip Sousa. Shortly after I started doing the announcing for the band, Mr. Price joked that he could go into the music library and pick a bunch of random music, and he believed I would be able to put together a program that tied all of them together. Well, with this concert, he beat me, but he cheated. If you've been paying attention, you know that the only thing these songs have in common is that if they are done in the concert order, the first letters in each title spell out March Madness. if I could have changed the order, I might have been able to come up with a common theme, but he took that option away from me when he picked the titles of the songs. So as it stands, we have come to the only song on the program that fits the theme, Sweet Georgia Brown. It was first recorded in March 19th of 1925 by Ben Burney and his Hotel Roosevelt Orchestra. One of its most famous incarnations is one by Brother Bones and his Shadows in 1949. Bones' instrumental version features musical bones and whistling. The Harlem Globetrotters adopted that version as their theme song in 1952, and that's still the music we hear every time that singular basketball team takes the court. Of course, the Harlem Globetrotters don't participate in March Madness, so even this song doesn't quite fit. We hope you've enjoyed today's concert. It has been our pleasure to share a little bit of March Madness with you. And so we leave you with the only basketball-related song in our program as we present Paul Murtha's arrangement of Sweet Georgia Brown.
Believe it or not, they don't watch us. You're looking at the Carolina game.